A very warm welcome to this exclusive broadcast on Pakistan Television Network. I am Dr. Maria Zulfikar Khan. My guest today is the Honorable Prime Minister of Malaysia, His Excellency Mr. Anwar Ibrahim. Excellency, it's a pleasure to have you here with us, and let me begin by welcoming you to Pakistan and also by saying that thank you for making time for this broadcast, because I know you've had a packed schedule. You've delivered a phenomenal lecture on Iqbaliyat, so thank you for making this time. Let me begin by saying that you are considered a friend of Pakistan. People here view you very differently than other leaders in the region, and you visited Pakistan on multiple occasions. How do you perceive the country?
Well, the country has enormous potential, there's no doubt. I remember being active as a youth leader in the 70s and in the government in the 80s. Pakistan was phenomenal. Education, research in science, and nuclear capabilities. And we look up as to Pakistan in terms of economic potential, trade, and cultural, educational. And to me personally, of course, beyond that, because in terms of my intellectual pursuit and interest, it will be the great Allama Iqbal, and in terms of the role of a great statesman of the century of Qaid al-Azam Ali Jinnah. So, but of course, there was some turbulence, and it takes time to restore the general confidence. I think that time is ripe. That is why I have extensive discussions with Prime Minister Sharif, and to pursue this in all fields possible.
Prime Minister, you've had a very extensive roundtable dialogue with the business community. And as we were chatting earlier before this broadcast, I was asking you, there's a huge potential between the two countries in terms of bilateral trade. What do you think are areas one can explore? And why do you think that this potential remains largely untapped, if I may say so?
You see, political elites, business elites, normally are comfortable with the pattern of activities that they are used to. If it is, and it's important. Malaysia, for example, depends largely on trade and investments from United States, Europe, and now more so in China. But we tend to ignore the importance of and the potential of other countries. And of course, here I consider Pakistan is an important first ally, and secondly, the potential which is untapped. Now, we have then to, for example, nudge as a new term to the political and economic and business elite to say, look, why don't you look these potential? And I've, of course, in the briefings, I've looked at the potential in terms of minerals, in terms of food, technology, in terms of industry, in terms of... so there's so many areas, even new energy from Pakistan. And from Malaysia now, as you know, has become hub for semiconductor industry.
Yes.
And the huge investments in that field. I think we can share, therefore, these areas, these sectors, and propel the economy upwards.
Yes. Talking about sharing, we'd like to learn from the Malaysian model as well, because how do you incentivize it for foreign direct investors? How do you incentivize things for them to invest in your country? I'd like to know a little about that.
No, we can learn. I mean, in many ways, we have benefited immensely from the exposure to the Pakistani initial experience. But now, of course, Malaysia, in terms of IT, digital, and semiconductor, of course, we were quite ahead in the region. And partly, issue of political stability, then issue of governance, and clarity of policies. People need to know what's energy transition to Malaysia, what is digital transformation for Malaysia, or the new industrial roadmap. If there's clarity, then there is effective enforcement, ease of doing business. I mean, we all inherit sometimes a system that is lax, that is more tolerant of, I should say, flaws, either corruption or lethargy, whatever. So I think if this can be addressed, and we are trying hard to do in Malaysia, I think it will generate more interest into the country, and then explore new markets, new avenues. Precisely why I choose Pakistan and of course engage with Prime Minister in a very close manner is because I think both of us see that enormous potential untapped, and therefore learn from each other and collaborate in this business.
Prime Minister, they say that the backbone of any country are the SMEs, and the SMEs play a pivotal role in building Malaysia. How do you ease things for them? Because small businesses, it's not always easy. So how do you make things easier for them in order for them to add to the country?
You have touched a very pertinent nerve in this, because whilst we have just announced, for example, last week, Oracle with $6.5 billion investment into Malaysia, it is important, it is critical, but the SMEs in terms of productivity is 97%, which means out of the 97%, probably we can choose 40, 50 that have that niche that can be supported through various agencies that give them either capital or know-how or additional training and exposure to both domestic and foreign markets. We have now some institutions and agencies just looking at the potential of SMEs, which have been largely ignored because they're small, they're not prominent in their presence, but they have the potential, which is again largely ignored. But you look in terms of workforce, in terms of their contribution to the national economy, is actually phenomenal.
Absolutely. Coming on to ASEAN, because ASEAN is a huge success story for the region. When you say ASEAN first policy, what exactly does that mean, if you could elaborate that for us?
Well, ASEAN is fortunate because it is considered to be one of the most peaceful sub-region in the world.
Indeed.
Okay. And secondly, it is economically probably very vibrant, one of the fastest growing economies. And this potential is enormous. So we say, okay, look after our neighbors, have that synergy, and consider the issues. There's comparative advantage in terms of economic potential, and work together. For example, sub-regional collaboration between the few countries. First ASEAN, then the neighbors. We have, Thailand is our neighbor. Yes. South Thailand is relatively poor. North Malaya is quite poor. So we say, why don't we focus on the economic zone and prepare the economy for both regions? Then we have recently set up this Singapore, Johor, which is part of Malaysia, economic zone. So we are fortunate in that sense. So the potential is enormous. We are doing that, and we are meeting very soon in Laos, again to evaluate and assess areas where we can do, for example, in terms of energy transition network, in terms of digital network for the region. So when I assume the chairmanship by the end of this year, then my focus will be in this new territory, including energy and digital.
Clean energy, you're moving towards green energy, right? Yes. One issue that I think, of course, like you highlighted, that there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential in trade between the two countries, but also I was listening to your ambassador, and he spoke about Pakistan taking advantage of the ASEAN network. How do you think that can be facilitated?
Well, ASEAN is an open trading regional group, and our focus, of course, to ensure that we remain neutral. So centrality, as we term it, is as our focus. So we continue to engage with East and the West, and with all regions. and not to be dragged by the superpower rivalries
Yeah.
or problems. Although we have to deal with it at times. We have differences, strong differences
Yeah.
with the United States on the issue, for example, Palestine and Gaza.
Yeah.
But that's not deter our continued trade, bilateral diplomatic relations, and also having them to invest in the country. There are still issues around the South China Sea, but I see don't only focus on China, because as a country, maritime nation,
Yeah.
we have issues with all our neighbors, but we don't need to fight over them. We just negotiate and have even sometimes protracted
We need to agree to
negotiation.
disagree.
Yes.
Yes.
And similarly, so we don't take that offensive view. I mean, we consider China a very important trading
Yes.
partner, friend, and we have not encountered any problem. So don't impose or dictate. That's our position. Now, and so now we're moving even towards other countries, to Australia, to India, and now to Pakistan.
Yeah.
And as you know, I mean, I will even engage with Bangladesh in that sense. So we will open up avenue, and I've assured Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif that is open not only to Malaysia, but you can use Malaysia as a hub for the region.
Talking about including other countries, inclusivity, Pakistan's been vying to become a full dialogue partner in the ASEAN. How does Malaysia view that?
Malaysia is supportive because our position is to engage and open up. I was even in Vladivostok on the issue of discussing with President Putin on the entry to BRICS. And of course, I've been invited to Kazan to attend, first as a partner member before ascension to become full members. So we have that open view, but then to finally decide will be this consensus within ASEAN.
Moving on, like you just said, we have issues within the region, even with the United States. A big, I think, bone of contention, as you rightly mentioned, is of course the Palestinian issue, the Gaza issue. And I think both our countries, Pakistan and Malaysia, they haven't shied away from voicing their concerns in terms of the conflicts that plague the Muslim world. As the Muslim Ummah, what do you think is lacking in our Muslim countries for us to be enabled to address these issues? Because many a times we look towards OIC and then we're not too happy with the performance of the OIC. So how do you think those issues can be addressed?
Well, Prime Minister of Pakistan made a very compelling case at the United Nations General Assembly, and I must commend him for that strong affirmative position on the issue of rights and the issue of dispossession, of continued genocide, aggression, atrocities. But of course, we can't expect only the Muslim world. Many of these countries, including Malaysia, are friends with the United States. So we're just appealing to the United States to at least have a consistent, coherent policy and not to continue with this contradiction. And sometimes some countries in the West, the hypocrisy about human rights and democracy, and you continue to allow the dispossession, colonialism, genocide in other countries. So that's the best we can do to continue to engage with our friends and to tell them, look, no more hectoring or preaching about democracy or human rights when you don't seem to be consistent and coherent in your message and your action.
Coming back to the OIC, because it began as a very promising forum. And I mean, today, the younger generation, of course, this is the digital age, and the younger generation sees a lot on social media. There's not a lot that can be, hidden. They're very disenfranchised with the OIC. What would you say to that? Do you think the OIC can do more, or perhaps, one shouldn't expect too much from it?
Well, OIC is an international organization. It depends on countries, member countries. And if member countries does not show that sort of a firm commitment to collaborate and work together, and that's it, you see, That's why Malaysia and like Pakistan, although we are very supportive of the OIC, we continue bilateral, multilateral arrangements that could effectively benefit and probably be more useful in terms of affecting the change. But people tend to be critical. Me too. I mean, probably before I assume.
I would say I'm disheartened. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and legitimate expectations.
Yeah.
Because people say this group of nations are powerful economically, etc. But then they are not doing enough. But then they means, members. The OIC is an international forum.
Yeah.
So I don't think it is just fair to cast aspersion against OIC, but then probably to make sure that they provide adequate forum to ensure that countries collaborate and takes a firm position. Because I can understand why people feel disillusioned, and some younger Muslims are even cynical about the whole raison d'etre of the establishment of such an important organization. But the reality strikes hard that which means every country, I sense therefore that let me put my house into order, let me focus on economic stability, improve my governance, and
let me do my bit.
Focus on my economic policies so that the economic fundamentals are great, then collaborate with countries as friends and to help one another.
Sure. When we began, before this interview, we were talking about regional connectivity, and you said, I was talking about SAARC, and I asked you, comparing it to ASEAN, it has not been able to achieve the same motives. Having said that, a large part of it is, like you pointed out, the regional stability. ASEAN region is very stable, and we perhaps in our part of the region, we need to learn from that. I think a burning issue, which I think contributes to this instability, is the Kashmir issue, which remains unresolved for the last 77 years. And now there's systemic human rights violations there as well. What does Malaysia feel about, how does Malaysia feel about the Kashmir issue?
Malaysia has, of course, expressed our concern on human rights all over the world. I mean, respective whether it is in Gaza or Kashmir or even excesses among our minorities, even in our country. So I think in that sense we are consistent. Although we understand the limitations in terms of domestic policies, but that does not stop us from at least expressing some of our concerns affecting minorities all over the world. I mean, when I hear, for example, in Malaysia, complaints about treatment of either Christians or Hindus, it affects me, and I think it compels me to take strong measures to avoid these excesses. So similarly, I expect other countries too, whether they affect minority Christians or minority Muslims, to do likewise. And I think people do understand where I come from. People say, well, why are you expressing this? I say, look, if you look at my life, being assaulted to near death and dumped into prison, and then suddenly I'm out here as Prime Minister, I don't express myself. I mean, they say, what's wrong with this guy?
You're there for a larger reason, for a bigger reason,
Yes. It is I should say, not only social moral imperative, but it's a personal sense of conviction.
Right. Talking about our people, Malaysia is home to over 150,000 Pakistanis, 170,000 I believe is the right number, and they're doing their part and productive members of the Malaysian society. For those watching you today, what would you like to say to them?
No, I take a very, I should say, liberal, open view. In the initial period, many Pakistani professionals were there. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, and professionals in all fields, and business community too. Then, of course, we do recognize that. But of course, there are now rules in terms of immigration policies, in terms of those without permits. It is being dealt with. But I would say that we appreciate. I mean, I'm not biased personally because my son-in-law is a Pakistani.
He's a Pakistani. Okay.
The mother is Pakistani, the father is Japanese.
Okay.
So,
lovely.
So I'm not saying personally because that's a position that we take with all foreigners and in our country. We may have problems as most countries have. Issue of migration, issue like the 200,000 Rohingyas in Malaysia, but we cannot deny the fact that many of them historically has contributed immensely to the country. So we take from a very humane angle.
If my memory serves me right, I remember I had gone to one of these business forums and the ambassador was addressing there. And I was told that the constitution was also written by someone of Pakistani descent. This is what I was told.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's amazing. You see, we had this constitutional committee during the British occupation prior to the independence. And one of the members, I think Justice Abdul Malik, if I'm not mistaken, who played a very critical, phenomenal role in trying to chart. Majority are Muslims, the country indigenous population Muslims, over there pockets of Christians, etc. And after independence, of course, we have brought in many Indians, mainly Hindus, Tamilians, and also Chinese. But he made it clear that for the country, you should have at least a recognition of Islam as the official religion. So he inserted that proposal. Islam is the religion of the federation. It's not an Islamic state per se, but at least it gives that sort of tacit recognition whilst guaranteeing the right of every single citizen to observe their own religious beliefs.
Right, and that is how a democratic nation should be governed.
Yes.
Prime Minister, now coming to something that is very close to your heart. You were at NUS today, you delivered a very impressive lecture, and you were also conferred the PhD degree on Iqbaliyat. Where did this interest start from? You are getting the works of Iqbal translated into Malay as well.
Yes.
How did this interest start?
No, so Muhammad Iqbal as a poet philosopher, to me, for the contemporary period, is probably an outstanding luminary in the field of scholarship. We started reading translated works mainly in English at those days. Some of the works, although originally Persian or Urdu, but I feel unfortunate that we don't master these languages, except Zindagi and Muhabbat, as you know. But the message is compelling.
Yeah.
You know,
Divine
Asrari Hudi, for example, is the self. Then Jawab Shikwa, then the answer. Then when I went to university, then we started being exposed to the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, which is to me an intellectually profound, compelling work, outstanding in nature, that compels us to think what is taqleed, what is tajdeed, what is subjugation without thought, and what is renewal, and forcing this tradition of knowledge and creative thinking, which is a major problem in the Muslim world at that time. And he had the foresight and the vision
in those days,
and which is so relevant now. So if for example, I used to teach even in the States, Georgetown University, for example. Some of my students, when they start asking me about Islam, I say, read this book, and we discuss next week.
Yeah.
You see, because that to me is just outstanding. It's something. I mean, I can go on. So
Please go on.
You see, he has this mastery of knowledge of what Western thought is all about. Okay, particularly German. But he has also imbibed his very spiritual Islamic understanding, which is full of knowledge and wisdom, not the obscure or should I say, obscure, narrow-mindedness, which we have to
Progressive
counter.
mindset.
Very progressive,
Yes.
encourage thinking, but at the same time very grounded in the fundamentals of Islam.
Yeah.
And then after that, having said that, then virtually provoke the mind, compel us to think and rethink.
Yes.
And in order to succeed, it must be through scholarship, knowledge and understanding. And to my mind, in fact, since the 80s, we have had series of seminars, a huge seminar those days, Iqbal and Asian Renaissance. You see, that was my theme at that time.
Okay.
And that time we even got Javid Iqbal to attend the conference.
And I think, like you mentioned, in this day and age where the religion is so misunderstood, here comes a man with a very progressive thought, and not now, it's, dating back years and years. And that is the true representation of Islam. Unfortunately, we're coming towards the end of this interview. Just one message. I wanted to ask you this. You grew up in a country that had just acquired independence. And of course, it comes with its own perils and its own challenges. You saw this country rise. For the youth of Pakistan, who are, perhaps disenfranchised or a little impatient, what would you say to them? What message would you give to them?
First, acknowledge that they are the future, and but they may be prepared. Knowledge, understanding, and patience and wisdom. How do you affect change? It's through understanding, imbibing knowledge. I always use when they come in, is assimilation of knowledge is a must. But for what? To disseminate truth and justice. So, I've been involved in the youth and students movement a long time. Somewhat a bit radical. But I think I cannot dismiss the importance of knowledge, wisdom, and patience. And
key being patience.
Yes. Because if you affect change, it must be through certain processes and winning the hearts and minds of the people, not only to the subject of the core students or youth. It's got to be people-oriented.
Right.
But otherwise, I think let the youth answer the question, because I don't qualify anymore.
So thank you so much, Your Excellency, for making this time, and I'm really honored and privileged for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.